back to Watchman's Whole Word Bible Study with me, Donovan, and we are in the book of Genesis, and we are about to move forward to chapters 20 and hopefully 21. Here they read pretty straightforward, so we'll try to read them as straight through as we can. And we just finished chapter 19, where we saw what happens when righteous people, men of God, men and women of God, people who are today Christians, people who are called of God, are trying to live in the world. And we saw that Lot lost everything that he attained in the world through his trying to be like the wicked people who he was surrounded by. And we saw how Satan deceived Lot. The way Satan deceived Lot was with money. Lot knew that living in Sodom, living among all these people and what they were doing, we're told in 2 Peter that it grieved his soul to live in Sodom, but he didn't move out. He didn't tell his wife, hey, we're going to have to give up all this fancy stuff that we have, and we're going to go back to being the nomadic herdsmen that we were always meant to be. Because his wife would have acted just like the pagan people around him. She would have either ridiculed him, shamed him into changing his mind. He might have actually approached her and had that response. Or she would have done something like said, well, why don't you go? You go. I'm not going back out there to live in a tent and wander from place to place with the herdsmen. I'm an important woman. I'm a woman of stature. And Lot and his wife became hooked on the world. And you can see that today. What rich person can be corrected? This is why Jesus tells us that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to see the kingdom of heaven. Because money oftentimes puts people beyond the reach of their salvation. And we see that all the time with celebrities. What celebrity can you tell that their hedonistic lifestyle is a sin? They wouldn't listen to another rich person, but they would certainly not listen to a person of meager means. They would a person of God couldn't go to a celebrity. You try to go to LeBron James and tell him that his lifestyle is hedonistic and he's parting himself from God. And he's standing on the edge of the pit of hell. Try to tell that to Tiger Woods. Nobody could tell Tiger Woods, hey, you collecting all these women behind your wife's back, it's going to cost you your health, your career, your reputation, and it's going to cost you half your fortune. It's going to cost you the chance of greatness. Nobody could have told Tiger Woods that. Nobody could have told him that. The money deceives him, just like it deceived Lot. He was rich, and that made him think that people respected him. But we see that at the end, they didn't respect him. They were gonna rape and kill him. And he lived with them all day, every day. He was one of their judges. He gave them counsel. He mitigated their disputes. But at the end, he was just nothing but another potential victim, another outlet for their gross sensual pleasure. So this happens all the time. You can't walk with God and walk with the world. Friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God, and enmity with the world makes you a friend of God. The two are not compatible at all. You are more likely to succeed mixing oil and water than you are to try to mix the Spirit of God with the spirit of the world. The two are diametrically opposed, and they're trying to undo and defeat one another. And we already know the outcome. So if you're trying to live in the world and trying to have you're trying to have your sin and have your salvation too, we already know the outcome. It's already written. You're going to lose. You're going to lose your salvation. You're going to lose your soul, and you're going to go to hell. That's the end of that story. And Lot should know that himself, but he doesn't. Lot wants to fit in. He doesn't want to lose his reputation. He doesn't want to lose all of his things. He doesn't want to get himself sideways with his wife. He doesn't want to pull his kids out of school. He doesn't want to go back out into a wilderness and sleep on a floor, the floor of a tent, and move every few months looking for grazing. He doesn't want to do all those things, and it cost him. It cost him. He loses all of it anyway. He loses all of his cattle, all of his money, all of his possessions. He loses his wife, and ultimately he loses his 2 daughters too, because he ends up fathering 2 children by them. A child by each of his 2 daughters. And what do you think happened after that? Imagine the shame every time he had to look at his grandchildren. I mean, imagine him trying to explain that. And I imagine that Lot probably, sometimes I wonder what happened to a man like Lot. I imagine he finally came out of the cave and sobered up. Because remember, one of the things he did was get nice and drunk. That's how he dealt with his pain. He got nice and drunk. Does it sound like anybody else in the Bible? Sounds like Noah, right? Get nice and drunk. I imagine that he finally sobered up and needed help, and there was nobody else to help him, so he probably found his way back to his uncle Abraham, and probably had to tell his shameful story to Abraham. And he probably ended up becoming, again, a nomadic herdsman, the very thing that he didn't want to do, and he almost perished with the wicked because he was living like the wicked. So now we're going to move on to back to Abraham and Abraham's story and Abraham's failures in the flesh. Right off the bat in chapter 20, we're going to see him do something terrible again that he should not be doing. And then we are going to be introduced, time permitting, to the child of promise, Isaac, who it is impossible for Isaac to even be conceived, because he's conceived by a woman who is approaching 100 years old and is well beyond the age of she doesn't have her cycle anymore, so she's a menopausal woman, and I don't think that she actually enjoys physical encounters by her own admission. So it's impossible, and that's the reason why God has waited all this time to demonstrate that only God could perform this. It's a miracle. Isaac is a child of promise, but he's also a miracle child. So let's get into it. Chapter 20, verse 1. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." So you see, Abraham is still, this is years later, he's still telling the same lie that he told when he went to Egypt, that Sarah is his sister. And he's going to say that it's not a lie because based on a technicality, but she really is his wife, and he's lying to people, and he's doing it not because he has to. He's doing it because he's afraid that wicked people will kill him and take her. So he lies, and then they just take her. So he keeps telling the story. He tells the story everywhere he goes. Last time in Egypt, he had Sarah tell this lie. This time, he's the one telling the lie. And I think that maybe Sarah won't do it now. She's a lot older. She remembers her time in the harem of Pharaoh, and she's probably like, "I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that anymore." So he's like, "Well, you know what? I'll do it. That's fine. You don't have to say a word. I'll tell him that you're my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. So there you have it again. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife." Now notice the difference between what happens here with Abimelech and what happened with Pharaoh. God didn't come and tell Pharaoh anything, and it sounds like the situation, it sounds like Sarah was in Pharaoh's harem for a lot longer than she was here with Abimelech, and it also sounds like Pharaoh, things went further with Pharaoh than they ever do with Abimelech. God steps in here much earlier than he did when she was in the harem of Pharaoh years earlier. Verse 4, now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, Lord, will you kill an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart, in the innocence of my hands, I have done this. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you have done this in your integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all of his servants and told them all these things, and the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. So it's common. They do this all the time. Look how he did it. He did it just as a matter of routine. This woman is almost 100 years old, and I'm sure she's still lovely, but he takes her just because he can, because he's the king. And I don't know if this is the only woman out of Abraham's house that they took. She's the only one who's called out. But now he's acting like you've brought this great sin upon my house. But Abraham didn't really bring the sin upon Abimelech's house. Abimelech's own sinful life brought the sin upon his house. He does this all the time. This time he just chose the wrong victim. But he victimizes people this way all the time, strangers who come into his land. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you see that you did this thing? Abraham said, I did it because I thought, there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. So this is how he justifies it right here. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So he makes a non-excuse there. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, this is the kindness you must do me. At every place to which we come, say of me, he is my brother. Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants and gave them to Abraham and returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, behold, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you. To Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you, and before everyone you are vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, and also healed his wife and female slaves, so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So Sarah must have been there for a while, because it sounds like God stopped all the cycles of the women in the house so that they couldn't conceive children. So however long that took, maybe a few months for them to realize, hey, nobody can get pregnant. Nobody can conceive here. So that might have taken a while. So she was there for a little while at least. Chapter 21, verse 1. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah, and here's another indication of the type of person that Sarah is. So she has this should be a great moment for her. She should be overwhelmingly happy. She's not. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, now everyone who sees laughs. Isaac's name is Laughter. Sarah herself said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. But now she sees Ishmael laughing, and she hates him. She hates him, she hates his mother, and she won't have it. So she uses him laughing, doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. She uses that as an excuse to do a terrible thing to him. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. So Abraham has grown to have a great deal of affection now. He's been with Ishmael has been his only son for now 14 years. So they're pretty close. And Ishmael sounds like he's a good kid, a good, strong, upright kind of kid. And Abraham doesn't want to hurt. He still doesn't care. Doesn't give a whit about Hagar, but he does care about Ishmael, and he doesn't like that Sarah now is using what should be a very joyous occasion to do a work of evil. But now what can he do? This is the result of his sin. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Be not displeased because of the boy, because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now that seems kind of cold-blooded. I mean, you see how Sarah won't even. Abraham's a rich man, and he's a powerful man. He could send her with money and other things, and he could take her back to her homeland of Egypt. But he doesn't. He gives her enough water for a couple of days. He gives her a loaf of bread for 2 people, and he says, "Well, good luck. Good luck." So you see how neither one of them, neither Abraham nor Sarah, ever had any love for Hagar. And at the end of the day, they don't care about Ishmael really either. As far as Abraham knows, he is trusting that God is going to take care of these two. But I don't think that's the reason why he sends her out with just some water and some bread. He does that because Sarah will be irate if he dresses her up and gives her money and sets her up like she's his wife. She won't have him behaving that way, even though she's the one who arranged this. So that's the reason why he listens to his wife Sarah again. Verse 15, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, "Let me not look on the death of the child." So she's just going to go and sit and wait for her son to die. And she lifted up her voice and wept. God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy to drink. So God personally intervenes, because I believe that Hagar is. I like Hagar, and I think that Hagar has adopted the faith of Abraham. I believe that she's given up her pagan religion that she grew up with in Egypt, and I think that now she believes in the one true God, Abraham's God, the God of heaven. And God sees that, and he rewards her for her faith. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So they turn out okay based on the grace of God. And notice that they never did go back to Egypt, and they never did go back to any of these pagan people. See how God took, how faithful Hagar was. She didn't want her son to grow up with this she didn't want him to go back to polytheism. She didn't want him to grow up in that kind of culture. She wanted him to follow the God who had saved her twice when Sarah had abused her, and Abraham had abandoned her. And he grows up and he becomes a great man. Now, he grows up with the same kind of problem that we see today with all these children who are growing up with their fathers who abandon them. He has respect for his father. He always says that Abraham is his father. He teaches his children that Abraham is his father. But he has this resentment. And his resentment is particularly strong toward Sarah. And he also develops. He's out here by himself. He's not under the tutelage any longer of Abraham. So he had 14 years of instruction in properly worshiping God with his father, but now he's on his own, and he is following God in his own way, and he develops this kind of bastardized version of faith with God, and he mixes things in, and we see that even today with the Muslims, where they worship one God, but it's colored, it's off-colored the way they worship. And so that started way back here with Ishmael trying to teach himself, because his father had abandoned him, and that's kind of how Ishmael ended up the way he did in all of his descendants. But they always said we're sons of Abraham. We're sons of Abraham. The Muslims will tell you to this day, the Arab Muslims, we're sons of Abraham. They have a claim to Abraham, just like the Jews will tell you that they're the sons of Abraham. Verse 22, at the time Abimelech in Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me, here by God, that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me, and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. So you see Abimelech here, he doesn't trust Abraham at all. He thinks Abraham is just a shifty little liar. So he thinks that Abraham's going to do something to harm him, because Abraham has already done something to harm him. When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I did not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard it until the day. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech in Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. So you remember when God made a covenant with Abraham, it was the same kind of situation where they made an animal sacrifice, and then Abraham was put to sleep, and God passed through the midst of the sacrifice and sealed the covenant by his own spirit. Here is how it's usually done. Usually both parties to the contract do the sacrifice, and they both pass in the midst of the contract, and that makes it binding. So here Abimelech and Abraham both passed through, but God didn't want Abraham's flesh involved in his covenant, so he passed through alone and did it on behalf of Abraham. And that was important, because you see how faithless Abraham's flesh is. And Abraham is, look how many times we've read of his failures in the flesh, over and over and over again. So he couldn't enter. We can't enter into a covenant with God. We're not faithful, and so we can't enter into a covenant. Any covenant that God makes with us, God makes a promise on himself. He swears by himself. He doesn't swear to us or with us or by us. He swears by his name only. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech in Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned there many days in the land of the Philistines. So Abraham pitches his tent here among the Philistines, who we're going to read about again and again, because they become great enemies, and they ended up kind of almost holding the nation Israel later. They almost hold them in a state of slavery, where the Israelites aren't even allowed to work metal. They're not even allowed to make the Philistines won't even let Israel have metal tools, because they're afraid that they're going to fashion them into weapons and rise up against them. And we'll see how the relationship with the Philistines and Israel goes when we get to the story in Judges of Samson, because it is God raises up Samson to judge the Philistines. But we can see the evil that they do. Look how long it lasts. It lasts for centuries. It lasts. So we're going to see that. In the next chapter, chapter 22, we're going to see Abraham demonstrate the true strength of his faith despite his failures in the flesh, and the true greatness in his relationship with God. We'll see that in chapter 22. Until then, keep heeding the call and keep yourself in the love of God. Have a great and blessed day, folks. Take care.